Hello, wait. You're listening to In My Humble Opinion, only on 101.3 Jams. MHO Talk Show. Thank you, family. Thank you for joining us once again for yet another show. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, Sir Charles, Miss Max, on none other than 101 Jam. Charles was number one for R&B, hip hop, and classics. And as promised, right about now, we are joined by folks from the 10th and Page Neighbors Association, and also they're here to talk about not only a little history of the neighborhood and that association, but the current campaign that's facing our community right now with the further proposed expansion of the dairy market. And the campaign is called Respect the Neighbors, Seville. And so definitely tell a friend, tell a friend. We are live right about now online, WVAI, IMHO Talk Show on streaming platforms, Facebook, YouTube, all that good stuff, Ms. Max.
That's right.
So yeah, so without further ado, I want to thank you all for joining us. We are joined by none other than Vizina Howard, James Bryant, and Zayana Bryant. Thank you all for coming today.
Okay.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, like and Zaya's been here before, and definitely proud of her and all of the work that she does, and want you all to know that like this, this is hopefully just the beginning of this being one of many platforms that are open to make sure that the community is talking and in constant conversation with not just information but action items, right? Because I think everybody in this room is very aware that it can't just stop at talking. Things never really change unless we stay involved and prepare our next generations to be involved, right? So Ms. Vizina, great to see you.
Yes.
Maybe we'll start with you. So 10th and Page Neighborhood Association. For the folks that may not be familiar, with the history of the neighborhood and how that association came to be, go ahead and give us sort of the background of that association.
All right. Well, the Neighborhood Association has been in existence for many years. My mother was also a member. She was secretary or president, vice president at one time or another. So I grew up following her sometimes to those meetings. And then as years went by, as I got older, I became involved with the Neighborhood Association. And now I'm president of the Neighborhood Association.
Okay.
And so that puts a lot that's going on, and we've seen a lot of change in the things that has happened. And we had problems with the phase one with Stony Point, but we didn't have strong neighbors to come out and meet with us and get the support. But we learned from the first. And so that's why we're coming out strong with this next phase to try to take some action to improve the situation, but we won't get fooled in, lied to as we were on the first phase. Hopefully that they will be willing to work with the community, but if not, we're just going to do what we can do to help make a change and let them realize what they're taking away from the community. They're not helping the community, they're taking away from the community. Because we have a lot of things that people do use in the community that they're going to take away. It's like the laundromat.
Right.
They want to take away our laundromat, and what they going to give us? Nothing. They're going to take away the plant store, the twice as nice shop. All of that, they just want to swipe it away and put up apartments, which we can't even afford to live in. We've had people from the neighborhood to apply for those houses, and they were turned down. But yet, when we had our meeting with Chris Henry at the very beginning of the first phase, we was told a lot of things that we would have, and none of that has come through. Even to use the building, we would have to pay to use the church and supply our own chairs, tables, whatever we want to use up in the building. We get to use the cellar to have our monthly meeting once a month, and then we can use that free. But anything else, they're not giving us really anything. They're taking up the parking on West Street, in which I have complained, and Chris knows it. I told him I would take a picture and send it to him because they told us the residents would not be parking on West Street, but they are. So that to be said, we have a lot to do to try to get things cleaned up.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And for those that don't know, so Chris Henry is the CEO for Stony Point, which is a developer of Dairy Market.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And he can't answer a lot of the questions we have thrown to him. He has not been able to answer. So how can he come to us and tell us this is what we're going to do,
Right.
but he can't follow up on the questions we have asked him?
Right. And we're definitely gonna loop back around to that too, as far as that relationship and how that's gone and how that possibly can be improved. But I want to make sure that Mr. Bryant introduces himself as well, because you're definitely a staple in the community as well, Mr. Bryant. So actually, let's actually start there for folks that don't know your history and representation in local government of the city. Go ahead and let folks know of James Bryant and how you've been involved in the city.
Well, first I'd like to say that I am a long-term resident of 10th and Page Street. Practically all my life, I've lived 42 years on 10th Street. I also lived in Hardy Drive, West Haven for 10 years. And I grew up on 11th Street up until the time I was about 10 years old. So I know this neighborhood very well. I grew up in it. And I was educated at Jefferson School and graduated from Lane. And so I've been a long time activist. And so sort of quiet in recent years, but when things that I'm passionate about, I will jump into activist mode. And so this particular situation with the dairy market has really caused me to jump into activism, because in phase one, there were lots of concerns that we had. We had a very small contingency of people that came out to the meetings. As you all well know, 10th and Page Street has become very gentrified. And so people move into the neighborhood, they sort of put up their fences and I don't want to be bothered. And I discussed this situation in an article in CBO Weekly with Jordan Yeager when he interviewed me several years ago. And I talked extensively, myself and Sharon Jones, about how the neighborhood is changing. So people would not come out to the meetings, and a lot of the older people, the late John Gaines was very active in the 10th Page Street Neighborhood Association, as well as Ms. Leah Brown. So unfortunately, those folks are not as active as they used to be.
Right.
So that being said, this particular project, I can recall when Chris came to us and he presented this project to the few of us who were able to attend this meeting, we all had concerns. One of the concerns, as Mazina said, was about the parking on West Street, because he said those residents would be parking in an underground parking garage. But guess what? Those residents have to pay for the underground parking garage. So now they have taken that wonderful, peaceful West Street and turned into it looks like a neighborhood in DC or in Georgetown, with cars back to back, people scrambling that live on that street to find parking.
And now, are we talking about a permitted block where they shouldn't even be parking anyway?
Yes, and I understand that also UV employees are parking up there too, so we're walking to work. But a couple of the concerns that we had early on was the fact that there are a lot of elderly people. I've been on 10th Street for 42 years. There are a lot of elderly people who live on that street who will not come out, and participate in the meetings, and one reason or the other. And our concern was the value of the property taxes going up on these people who are on fixed income. That was a major concern, that this project would have an effect on our elderly citizens in that neighborhood. Secondly, I can recall West Street being blocked off for almost 2 years. You couldn't get in and out of that street because all the construction going on. And just in recent weeks, they were washing the windows on the building, and they blocked off West Street. You couldn't get up and down West Street. So there are lots of inconveniences. And I think the major concern that people have is the fact that with this new phase 3, it's going to, can you imagine being in an older neighborhood such as 10th and Page, and you got a 7-story apartment building right in the midst of 9th Street? It almost looks like that student apartment building on West Main Street hovering over Hardy Drive.
Right.
So there were lots of concerns. And Chris, I didn't attend the meeting, but I did watch it online. And he couldn't respond to any of the questions. Blacks are not living in those apartments because they can't afford to. Going into Durham Central to purchase food, the food is expensive. A scoop of ice cream costs $5. If you take 5 kids, that's $25. People just can't afford to buy the food in that place, in that eatery, because it's so expensive. So we have lots of concerns. And one of them being that this is going to have an adverse effect on the neighborhood. And they thought they were going to rush this through, but we were alert
Good.
at this point in time.
Yeah. And, I mean, and that's so ominous, right? It's like you have this towering building over top of the neighborhood, and then and as we saw at the meeting, there's even another slap in the face is like there being a mural of black women, like on it.
Yes.
And then you talk about the parking. It's like, so you already living in a in a spot with rent that most current neighbors can afford to, and then you're gonna take our parking. I mean, like, there's just so many. Let me ask you about that though. Like, are there repercussions for that? Like, are you able to, like, are the police responding? We can even call them the task. If somebody's parking in a permitted zone that they're not supposed to, are law enforcement taking any action? Like, are they ticketing?
Well, see, on that side of the street, it's not permits.
Okay.
So that's then they're taking the whole side.
Gotcha. And I have heard neighbors though residents say, even at the last meeting, that like one lady said, she came outside her door and she told one of the employees, you can't park there, and they kind of ignored it. So I'm curious about things like that. Hopefully they're getting ticketed at least. Right?
Well, we don't know because they're blocking off, coning off their spots for those who don't have driveways. And I was talking to residents because I'm also on the tree committee, relief committee, and we were going around the neighborhood asking people if they were interested in planting trees in the neighborhood. And one family lives right on West Street, who's probably been there at least 60 years, said that they were gathering like they normally do, like we do. We sit on the front porch and we talk and have fun. And said one of the residents across the street in those apartments came by and said, would they please stop making all this noise, you're disturbing them. And I'm like, well, you all have been in on this block for like 60 years, and we kind of laughed about it. So, that kind of stuff, just telling neighbors who have been there all those years, to stop making all this noise. But there are lots of concerns, I think, with Zion, and we are beginning to mobilize and making people aware and we put that video on social media so people can actually hear the conversation. And we want to ensure that everybody has a voice in this. And I think Zion is doing a great job organizing the troops and getting people informed about this next phase that's about to happen, or hopefully hopefully it won't, but we're not in control of that.
And before we elaborate on more of that info, I want to kick it to Zion. If there's anything that you wanted to sort of intro to folks about your perspective on these things.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. I'm really grateful to my Nana and Mr. Brian and other neighbors who have given me kind of the blessing to help facilitate this work. I've learned a lot of lessons over the past. Well, I've been, I did my first protest when I was 12, so I've learned a lot of lessons now at 22 over the past 10 years of how to find the power players and how to organize folks to do the power mapping first, to do the political education as a foundation, and then to mobilize and to organize and to advocate. So here, my main goal is to make sure that the residents, the neighbors, are well equipped with the information that they need to speak the language of the people who have historically left us out of conversations and who have also tried to, I would say manipulate. Some people feel like that's a strong word, but try to pull those kind of fast developments without engaging us properly. Because we do know that they have to kind of by law have these sort of public open meetings. But it's typically a check mark just to say they did it and to move along their process. My interest is to make sure that we understand that that's actually a platform for us to have some accountability. So it's a lot about perspective and how we see these opportunities, how we identify them, and how we know that, this is a long-term type of process of us advocating to protect our homes, our legacies, and a space that is so near and dear to our hearts. But more than just like the kind of like philosophical pieces of it, it's our homes. It's literally where we live. So, there's that part of like necessities. The laundromat is a necessity. So we want to start by making sure that everybody speaks the language and is on the same page. Secondly, from that point on, we want to make sure that we are taking up the spaces that we should be taking up. We need to be on the committees. We need to be in the public meetings. We need to be in the forums so that there is no way for anyone to escape hearing our voices and hearing our concerns. And then the other piece is the intergenerational kind of dialogue, connection, and partnerships that will come out of this, these kind of meetings of the neighbors. I'm learning a lot. I'm recording with the blessing and the consent of the elders to record these stories, because we look at the archives, our faces and our stories and our narratives are often not present in those spaces. So how do we archive our own stories? Those stories about how, my great grandmother was having social club meetings and NAACP gatherings and neighborhood meetings in the living room of the house that I grew up in, my mom grew up in, my Nana grew up in. That's history. And to me, as a person who's interested in histories, I want to make sure that that's properly archived. So there are so many different things that are happening right now where this was a turning point for us. And it was very clear that we had to act in the moment. But don't get it twisted. Anyone who's listening, know that there are multiple things that we are doing, because it's not just about Dairy Market. It's about the university.
Right.
It's about the young students who go to UVA, who move into Grady, who move into Venable, to the Page neighborhoods, and they don't respect the neighbors. So this is a message to a lot of different people that there has to be respect first. In order to really build community with folks, you have to respect them and you have to honor who they are. And so that's my role, that's my goal.
Absolutely.
And I hope that this turns out to be something where we're actually able to capitalize off of the momentum of this moment.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'll tell you what we're going to do, though. Let's go ahead and take a quick break, because I think that was a very, very good intro. So when we come back, let's start talking about that accountability that, as I mentioned, from top to bottom. Like from everybody, from from resident to local government, right, and developers included. So IMHO family, we are joined by Respect the Neighbors, say, and we have a flyer here too that we can share online as well. Respect the Neighbors, say no to the Dairy Market expansion. All right, and it looks like that there's another meetup coming up Thursday, August 3rd at 5:30 at the Legal Aid Justice Center, 1000 Preston Avenue, Suite A. All right, and of course we'll get them to talk more about that event. But stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break. With more with the 10th and Page Neighborhood Association.
No, wait.
We live in a society in which structural racism is a very real thing. We are all dealing with that in every aspect of our lives, and the media is a reflection of our community.
Historically, Black people have been portrayed a certain way in the media to justify normative assumptions around political and social issues.
More Black people behind the cameras, in front of the cameras, more producers, more people of color producing, so they can go and get the content that's needed so they can highlight our attributes.
I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand how our voices just aren't heard. Even if you're in the newsroom, sometimes you get completely ignored and stereotypes are allowed to perpetuate. And one thing we want to do is combat that, and also bring information to people so they can be as informed as possible when choices are made in this city, so they can do whatever they can to get their voices heard.
What I believe can be done about the situation is to have more people of color creating news stories, more people who have a interest in and a social consciousness that relates to the stories that they're telling.
Charlottesville Tomorrow looks at these issues. We can present them on IMHO. Vinegar Hill Magazine can take that a step further, and just together we can just make this thing that can be an example of how we can change the media landscape, how we can be more inclusive to get these voices in, to get these people heard. That's just one thing that doesn't happen in so many places, and it's a shame.
We think we live in a society that's very progressive, and we're talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and all these things. Still, the way that Black people, and I would say, and I would argue, especially Black men, are portrayed by the media is incredibly dangerous, and you've seen the sort of tangible violence that it's led to over the past year.
The community can support the SIM project by first and foremost giving us an opportunity. We understand that it can be difficult to give trust right now, especially considering the current social and political environment. but this project will only be as successful as the community allows it to be. And so we ask you to give us the opportunity to do the work, critique the work, and make sure that we stay aligned with the vision. Another way that the community can get behind the SIM project is through engagement. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're talking about. We want to put your stories out there. And so whether it's reading the articles written by Charlottesville Tomorrow or Vinegar Hill Magazine, or tuning in to In My Humble Opinion on Sundays on 101.3 Jams from noon to 3 p.m., either way, we want you engaged. We want you to be part of this. The community can also support the SIM project through funding. To learn more about how to support SIM, you can visit our website. Thank you for your support.
Only on 101.3. IMHO Talk Show, back like we never left with 10th and Page Neighbors Association, talking about the campaign Respect the Neighbors. And so now what we want to do with this segment is definitely, like hit on that keyword, that buzzword that I heard Zion mention, which is accountability, right? Because I'm big on that. And we're always big here on, at that show of it's not enough to just, like say who's in the, necessarily who's in the wrong, but sometimes the system is the system, unfortunately. You know what I mean? And like we got to get inside the system to be able to change it. But while we're, going up against that, we got to do everything, like within our power, to make our situations better. So I wanted to go from local government, the developers, and the citizens. And as you said, you got a message from a Seaville homegirl that no longer lives here, but wanted us to know that folks from here that may not currently reside here, are still in the fight with you, which is a beautiful thing to share. So that's kind of our goal. And I know Miss Max from last segment, had something that she wanted to tie in as well.
So first and foremost, I want to thank our guests for being here today. We appreciate you, and thank you for using this platform to help spread the word and get more support behind your initiative. I want to encourage all three of you to use this opportunity to talk about what the 10th and Page area means to you, because people who don't have any point of reference, or much like the developers, I believe, who see it as real estate and an opportunity and a way to make more money, miss the point of what something means to someone. Unfortunately, the way that tends to go is that they only recognize that when it directly impacts them. So make sure you use this opportunity to let everyone know what the area means to you. And then the other thing that I'm hoping that someone can kind of list off for us is what your specific demands are. For the listening audience, whether we're talking about local government, policymakers, or the developers themselves, what are you specifically asking for?
Well, I myself, Zena, I grew up on Anderson Street, and back then everybody knew each other. Everybody got along. Now we have people that move in, and they may speak, they may not. It's just being able to reach out and know your neighbors. We don't always know all our neighbors now, but at one time we did. And as far as accountability, when we used to meet with Chris Henry at the beginning of phase 1, he told us things that we would have, and it was all just talk. Because once they started building and as they got finished, things changed. And then when we did confront him about certain things that he said would be there, maybe it was misunderstood. But we didn't misunderstand you when you came to our meetings and promising elderly people they could have that little meetings there, and told a few residents, well, if you all ever decide to want to move into one of these apartments, you'd be more than welcome. But then we send 4 people up there to them, and none of them was able to get into those apartments. They said their income wasn't eligible for them to get in. So my question was, how are you helping the neighborhood? If we can't live there, how are you helping us? You're putting us out more or less, not helping us.
Thank you for that.
That was a good question you asked us in terms of the neighborhood, what it means to us. Having grown up practically my entire life in the 10th and Page Street neighborhood, the 10th and Page Street neighborhood has a rich history. It has a history of Black entrepreneurs, Black teachers, educators, most of them who taught at Jefferson School. It also has a rich history of just being, for us as children, we didn't have a lot to do, so we had to be creative. So Tuesday and Thursday nights was the Carver Recreation Center skating. Sunday was after church, was a meeting place, a gathering place. That was our social time that we could go up and talk to our friends and get the latest gossip. We could smell the bread over at the Southern Bakery where the legal off. That was a bakery at one time. You could go in the back and get the day-old bread for 5 cents a loaf. I can remember my grandmother telling me to come up and go to the bakery, and she said, I want you to get 5 loaves for you all and 5 loaves for me. And so it was 7 children, so it was 7 of us. So then 5 loaves of bread didn't go very far. And so looking out for the elders in the neighborhood.
Yes.
Everybody, you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have texting. So if you did something at school, by the time you got home, mama and daddy already knew what had happened or transpired in school. We were taught to revere our elders, to look up to the elders. So if Miss Susie there in the street needed her snow shovel, it wasn't a question. You were going to shovel her snow. Everybody knew everybody. We all we all were we've been lifelong friends.
Mhm.
That's what 10th and Page Street means to me and to us, because it was a community of people who didn't have very much, but we had love and we had affection
That's right.
for one another in that community.
Mhm.
And this is what bothers me about this whole thing. We are losing, or we have lost most of it,
Mhm.
that community. The church was the cornerstone of every Black community.
Yeah.
Trinity Church is where I was baptized at the age of 6 and confirmed at the age of 15. Trinity Church was the church that we organized at Lane High School.
Mhm.
And we marched to Trinity Church to protest the injustices that was dealt to us
Right.
while we were in high school, the lack of Black educators, the lack of Black administrators. So we organized and said, we're going to march out and walk to Trinity Church, where the NAACP and my late godfather, Reverend Henry Mitchell, met us. So we could express our frustrations in terms of the lack of. So that church is very important. It's very historic for the 10th and Page Street neighborhood, because this is where we met and we aired out our differences in terms of equality or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
So when I look around the neighborhood now, and I will be 70 years old next year, I feel like I'm living. Yeah, I feel like I'm living in a foreign land, because we don't have that connectiveness that we had as children growing up. And I think the accountability piece is, I think what bothered me most about that conversation the other night was when Mr. Sales, my understanding that he came with vouchers in hand, because some people need to be placed there because they were still working on Preston's Hall. And he was told no, because the vouchers didn't cover the entirety of the rent. I think that's what bothered me the most. And you say you're about community, you're about looking out for poor people, but then you say one thing and do another. Those apartments are not for people who want to get a hand up and get out of poverty. People are not able. When you talk about affordable housing, where is it? I have not seen it.
Right. And what does affordable mean?
Yes,
You know?
it could be affordable to you, but not affordable to me.
Yeah.
So I think that's what bothers me the most, is that they have to be held accountable and not rush in and build this monstrosity in the last of, and people in Rose Hill need to be aware too, because they own Preston Plaza too. So they may be coming their way.
Yeah.
So we've got to mobilize the forces and say, we just can't have this big monstrosity in our neighborhood. And it really will be just blocking and locking us in.
Yeah. And Zai, like I want to augment Max's question a little bit for you, because like when you see, like the legends right here, like they came before you, not only what does neighborhood mean to you, but like what keeps you going, like because you apparently have a calling on your life, you know what I mean, like to do the activism that you do. But but let's be real, to hear generationally, like the struggles, right, of going up against the system, trying to change the system. Like what gives you the courage to still fight that fight?
I mean, I often hear people say things like, well, I'm not my ancestors. And I think that that's true. We are not nearly as organized as our ancestors were, and we're not in some ways nearly as resilient. So to me, what keeps me going is wanting to fulfill the shoes that have already been put out for us. Whether we're talking about, we talked about the African Festival before we got started here. That's something that's been going since I was young, right? Like, and so it doesn't bring me any joy to see some of our recipes being lost. People say on social media, we're losing recipes. We are. Some of these conversations and the kind of gold mines and the wealth of knowledge and stories that some of these neighbors have is invaluable. You can't place a dollar sign on it and it will never be replaced. You can't replace people. So to me, that's kind of what keeps me going. The neighborhood to me is about the connectivity, the family, atmosphere that we've always had. I remember just a couple months ago, someone was, someone that I grew up with was murdered on UVA Corner. And the next morning, myself, my nana, other people that I went to school with, their parents were sitting in that person's parents' living room, offering not only our condolences, but how can we help? And that's something that, you get that from your neighbors when you grow up in a close-knit community. And when that changes, it doesn't bring joy to any of us. But that goes to show, right, like just how impactful it is to have good neighbors, and you can't replace that. So the question that was posed about what are the demands, well, you know, one being the affordable units. So there's been kind of conflicting conversations and information going about what exactly that looks like. Well, I've been educated over the past few days. It's been since Tuesday that this has really taken up a lot of my brain space. And I learned that when we talk about what 100% AMI is, it's the affordability of affordable housing or housing. It's based on market rate and also the local average income of people in the area. Well, we recognize that Charlottesville has a lot of wealthy people. And so that median income is being skewed up way high because we have some really high earners and we have some really low earners. And so because of that, 100% AMI is what you would think for like your school teacher. It's not taking into account those really wealthy people. So when we say 80% AMI, that's not, you know, that's still not affordable to some folks. When we talk about people with Section 8 vouchers, or, you know, people who have lived in the neighborhood for a long time, they need really about 20, 30, 40% AMI to really, for it to actually be affordable. But what the dairy market is saying that they're only willing to do is 80% AMI. And that's what phase 1 has reflected. So we are priced out, even with the voucher, even with support and help. What Mr. Bryant alluded to was an instance that we've been talking about where Mr. Sales had these people with these vouchers, and apparently there was a $50 discrepancy. And they were unwilling to bring the price down $50 to enable, you know, them to get into those units. So to me, it's a greed thing, right? It's a money thing. So we're talking about we need more affordable units at a lower AMI so that people can actually afford it. People from the neighborhood can afford it. Additionally, we're talking about seeing this Trinity Church space be used by the neighborhood to let them have some co-creative kind of decision-making agency and power over what that space is used for, whether it's cultural programming and events, or whether it's some sort of, you know, consistent space that is housed there for us to get resources that we need. I mean, what can that look like? Is it another after school program? The youth clearly need a space to go. So having the residents have some power at the table to decide what that space turns into. Next, the laundromat. The neighbors want to know what's happening with the laundromat. The plan does not reflect that it's going to be saved. And when you talk to the other local business owners whose businesses are planned to be taken away in this phase 3 and 4, they are also asking the same question. To me, it's interesting because a laundromat isn't racially exclusive to Black folks. There are white people in the neighborhood who are buying these, you know, older homes that don't have the space or the ability to hold a washer and a dryer. So they have to go to the laundromat too. Students go to the laundromat. People from other, like from Rose Hill and Venable and other streets nearby go to the laundromat. A lot of people use it. Local businesses use the laundromat. So that's a place, that's a catch-all place where it's very diverse. And there are a lot of different people with many different incomes and stories and walks of life who use that space. What is the impact of that leaving? And can we get some answers about that? And then lastly, I would say there needs to be an ongoing better relationship with the dairy market, with Stony Point, and with this community, because phase 3 and 4, and then there could be 5 and 6. So what is the actual rapport like with the neighbors? They're asking for that to be better. They're asking for, you know, an apology and acknowledgement of the mistruths that were told and then gone back on. But also, how do we move forward? Well, we move forward by giving the neighbors a seat at the table, and some actual power when they're in those seats to help create a better relationship.
Wow, thank you for that. Now the accountability piece, we haven't really talked local government yet. Because when you're talking about private business, to a certain extent, they have free reign, like, to do what they want, and they're going to say, well, like, we're in it for the profit, and whether we feel that it's civically and socially right, you know, like to maybe put just a small dent in their profit, you know, like for the sake of the community. They, at the end of the day, they don't have to. Like, so what role do we feel like when it comes to zoning and things like that, to where the local government should be more involved?
I think the planning commission the planning commission we need to go to the planning commission. We need to ask, what is a special use permit process like? And what can we do to kind of minimize? Because like you said, they don't have to listen, and they can, once they buy that property, they can do what they want with it. But that is why there's kind of checks and balances processes with like these permits or these kind of approvals that have to go through the planning commission and then to city council, so that that kind of takeover can be mitigated. And so I think that that's why those processes are into place, and that's again why we need to educate the neighbors on how they can go through those processes to get some accountability and to kind of get some kind of control over these ideas.
Now, one other thing that stood out to me too, like I hear stories of some folks deciding to sell their homes because of the property value rate, like has caused tax increase, so they can't afford taxes. I noticed things like AHIP and whatnot. So I'm curious if you've seen any involvement from those offices, because I even think about, how I feel like there's enough Black folk here that's, like that even has like middle and upper incomes that could be putting funds together, if they know, and if we know, I'll include myself, about like those who have certain needs and whatnot. Like I'm curious about AHIP and the impact of just not being able to afford taxes, and if that would, if you see that as helping people to keep their homes and maybe not sell.
But when you said working together, we had just talked about that, getting people together and we'll be able to help take care when things like that happen to someone in a neighborhood that it's going to happen to. And as far as AHIP, a lot of times they don't have the funds to do but so much to houses nowadays, because they say they get donations. So we had talked to a few people that have talked to AHIP, and they'll be on a waiting list, but then how long would I be on that waiting list before I would be able to get any help? You know what I'm saying? The situation with my home would get worse while I'm waiting to, be able to get it done. So that's why we talked about that earlier, about getting people to come together that has some type of funds that would be willing to do that. We was talking about that.
Okay, awesome. Because I heard Zion mentioning that, that kind of fits into, even like the neighbors' accountability as well, but our accountability to each other, right? Because the stories you tell, Mr. Brown, like they're the same in Black communities everywhere. Of like, it's more generationally almost like no offense, it's not. Of course I'm generalizing, but it's like we sort of lost that sense of community, though, and I'm kind of putting the onus on us for that. You know what I mean? Of like, we used to go to grandma's house and that's where you met. And there was that sense of, of like working together, the churches being the epicenter and that kind of thing. Like we have lost a lot of that,
I think it's important too, that we have to continue. And I'm so happy. And I'm of the mindset now that I've gotten to a certain age and I'm winding down and going to really retire. I think it's important that we pass the torch to the next generation. And also it is our responsibility to look out for the elders. They have fought that fight for a long time.
Absolutely.
And they may or may not have that fight in them. So it's our responsibility to become their voice, to be an advocate for those folks, to ensure them that we are going to do the best we can to ensure that you are able to stay in your homes and be happy and not worry about your house falling down. It's part of our culture. It's our responsibility to ensure that our elders are taken care of. That is so important. And also to pass the torch to the next generation, such as Ayana's generation. And she's here to advise us how to move forward. And it's exciting that it's intergenerational, that we are able to work together. And that's a very important part of what we're trying to do with this project, to inform those who need to be informed.
That's great. I was going to say, speaking of that, inform too, don't forget Thursday, August 3rd, 5:30 at Legal Aid Justice Center on Preston Avenue is going to be the next Respect the Neighbors meetup to get more information. Max?
So real quick before we take a break, I too also streamed the video of the town hall or the forum online. And I think while what Charles mentioned earlier, which is developers can do whatever it is they want to do to an extent, because there's someone that has to grant them permission to do that. I think that what they're missing and need to understand is that when you come in and choose to develop in an area that is has historically belonged to a minority group or Black people, you have an obligation, not a choice, but you have an obligation to do your development in such a way that benefits the individuals that live in that community, that helps to continue the lineage of or the heritage that is within that community. And you know, I understand they get into business to make money, but they need to understand that a responsible developer would make those choices. And I think that that's what we as a community who advocate for things like this need to make sure that we lean on and hold other individuals who are giving them permission to develop accountable to. They have an obligation. You can't just come in and wipe the slate clean there. And then the other thing that I'm also concerned about is what actually needs to happen in order for the natives of that area to see the change that you are demanding. Because my fear is that unless this project impacts white folk, and unless you hit these developers where it counts, which is in their pockets, you'll see no change. And Zai, I know you all have a good leader in place, but that's what needs to be leaned on, is the reputation and the credit of that development, and making sure that our counterparts understand what is happening there and willing to join in with us in order to help fight against what the developers are attempting to do.
Yeah. And I will say, who wants to have the last word on that? Because we are we're over time, and everybody here knows Clee Logan.
Yes, we do.
He's gonna be hitting my phone in a second. So who wants the last word? Thanks, Matt.
Okay. I will say that we are very aware and in tune with what Ms. Max just said. It's important to know that this fight has to have some allies too. They have to also speak up and support the neighbors. And that is what we're going to do. We're going to build coalitions with folks, not just in 10th and Page down the hill, but also West Haven, also the bordering neighborhoods. And we're going to make sure that it's clear that they know, that we know, that these decisions are going to affect people across race lines, across socioeconomic status. The power and the energy that's in this room even right now, but that was in my grandmother's room on Thursday when we had 35 people come on a 5-hour notice. And we had people of all races and all income levels in that room. So I'm just going to say that this time is different. We have said that it feels like it's going to be the next Vinegar Hill, but we're not going to allow that to happen.
There you go.
And we are ready. And we are going to make sure that we are well trained and we are well organized. And if you want to join us, we will see you on Thursday. You can hit us on Instagram at blackgirlbuilders_. You can find me on social media. Let's build and let's work. Thank you for having us.
Awesome. And can you please tag us and share us those info so we can get the word out? Because we did have a comment or a question online of, is Thursday only for neighborhood residents, or is it open to the public?
We want to center the residents in that space, but if you want to come as a supporter, you are more than welcome to join us.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all. And you always have a platform here, so definitely, keep up the great work and let's stay in touch.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.